Hi, welcome to this Money9 Exclusive. I'm Kartik Malhotra. Money9, incidentally, is India's first multilingual personal finance news service from the TV9 network. I'm Kartik Malhotra, and there's a recent report that Orios Venture Partners has released, which categorically states that India's unicorns or startups valued at over $1 billion are employing as many as 1.4 million people. To put that in perspective, that's almost the same number of people that India's armed forces employ, and in fact a little more than what the Indian Railways employ. So joining me today are two very special guests. I've got Rehan Yar Khan, Managing Partner, Orios Venture Partners, as well as, and Orios Venture Partners is somebody who's released this particular report that I'm referring to. I'm also joined by angel investor, former chairman of NASSCOM, Saurabh Srivastav. Gentlemen, good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us on Money9. Saurabh, if I can start with you. The Prime Minister recently at a NASSCOM event said that startups need to become institutions in their own right and should be built to last and not built to exit. How long before we actually see that happening?
Well, the fact is you've already seen it happen. Startups started not this year and last year. Startups started in the 1990s. So look at Infosys, look at Wipro. They were startups. They started at that time. They've been built to last. Multi-billion-dollar companies. 5 of the top 10 IT services companies in the world by market cap are now Indian. There's no other country which has as many in the top 10, not even the US. So we built companies to last. These were startups. They actually started even without the likes of Rehan and me. No angel investing, no venture capital. I started my company with 17 lakhs. So we have seen that happen. I think what's happened is, and what the Prime Minister was referring to, is this current fascination with valuation and exits. So there are startups and companies that are confusing capital they raise as equivalent to revenues they get from customers. The issue is, if you want to build to last, you must focus on customers and revenues from customers. And if you have customer revenues, investment capital will flow to you automatically. So we do have today a very large class of entrepreneurs who are doing a startup. Their only focus is, okay, let me raise this kind of money. I need 18 months. So many startups come and tell me, look, I want to do this. I have to chase revenues. I've got to go for market share because my next round valuation will depend on that. Right? So they're not building a company to last. So I am completely with the Prime Minister. I think when you build a company, you should never build it because you want to make a quick buck. It's not the reason you should be an entrepreneur. So when you build a company, it should be to solve a serious problem that will be of benefit to a lot of people on scale, which means you can be successful on scale. And you should build the organization structure, the architecture of the organization, think through a few years ahead across multiple horizons. As a startup, you're not around for 3 years if you're not around for 12 months. So you need to think through that, but you should not be building a company just because you want an exit in 12 months or 18 months. You should build a company which actually can go on forever. Of course, you'll get an exit if you wish to. If it's that kind of company, you'll get a very high valuation. So, to my mind, the Prime Minister was actually spot on. I do see so many entrepreneurs who think this is a place to quickly jump in, make some money, and then go back, do something else, make some money again. It's a wrong
Right, but
approach.
Saurabh, you referred to companies like Infosys, and obviously, we are talking about a very different era back then. The competition landscape was very different. Today, 9 out of 10 startups actually don't make it. So at some point, if somebody does find a lucrative exit option, they go ahead and grab it. So how do you ensure that startups stay in the game for a long duration and really make real authentic customers?
So firstly, Kartik, let me correct you for that. You talked about Infosys and whatever, no competition. There was massive competition, not from Indian companies, from overseas companies. We had no brand, there's no venture capital, there was no bandwidth. You could only take $8 when you went. So those were built under much tougher conditions than the startups of today. So please don't dismiss that. They had any amount of competition and much tougher competition. And yet they build companies to last. So my question is not about don't do an exit. Perhaps I didn't say that correctly. By all means, when you get an exit, and if you wish to exit,
I
please
think what you're
do.
alluding to is that that should not be the focus. The idea should not be to make a quick
I'm
buck
saying
and
you
get
should build
going.
a company to last. You should build a company to last. And along the way, whenever you wish, do exit. That's fine. It's not a problem at all. Because if you build a company to last and the investors think that that's what you've built, actually you will get a very good exit,
Right.
far better than anything else. That's all I'm saying, because otherwise you've built something unstable, something which looks and feels nice and might crumble. So that's the point I was trying to make.
Right. Point taken, Saurabh. Rehan, let me come to you. So, Budget 2021 had a fairly large focus on employment generation, but somehow the startup story wasn't very clear in this entire employment generation cycle. Do you think the budget could have added a little more impetus for startups?
Well, I mean, India is probably the only country in the world which has a budget announcement, right? No other country in the world, whether it's the UK, the US, Germany, has this budget announcement. So, what is the budget, right? The budget is the government's internal fiscal, what how they're going to manage their finances. I think we in India have got into the habit that every budget is going to present a series of SOPs to various sectors. So I don't think first of all that is the right way to do it. Coming up with policy is something which is a year-round exercise. It's a multi-year exercise, and most policy, as you can see, happens outside of the budget, right? What can the government do to help startups is something which I've always said for the last 10 years is get out of its way, right? We all know that when there is a lot of regulation, it slows things down. And really, the best advice I've always given the government is that please get out of our way and help us build. I think Saurabh will stand testament to that of how IT services got built back then. It's just that they had a very free hand, whereas other sectors, if you remember back then, were fairly regulated, right? And this was not as regulated. So Mr. Modi has also said in the past, minimum governance, and I think that is the right philosophy, right? That any government needs to take. The startup. Why do we have these 1.4 million jobs? The reason we have these jobs is because the startup industry is doing very well. It's employing a lot of people, whether it's delivery boys, cab boys, whether it's people in the call center, whether it's IT engineers, managers, people back in the warehouse, marketing executives, social media people, and so on and so forth. Is just absorbing a lot of jobs. You can imagine something which is $104 billion in valuation will employ a lot of people. There's nobody, in the well-to-do part of India, or even in middle India, which doesn't have 10 apps on their phone that they're regularly using, whether it's payment apps, banking apps, food apps, cab apps, gaming apps, and so on and so forth, right?
Right.
So very, very large industry which has emerged.
Right. So, Rehan, I'll just come back to the point that Saurabh was alluded to earlier, that Indian startups are actually flourishing because they're trying to solve a problem. So, when it comes
Yeah.
to solving a problem or easing the pain, do you think Indian startups are still very metro and urban India centric? Are they really able to, especially the companies that you are advising, mentoring, also looking at funding, are Indian startups now actually looking at grassroots level problems also seriously as a business venture?
So I'll tell you something. I went on a road trip during lockdown across all of North India. So I drove from Bombay to Gujarat, Rajasthan, Punjab, Himachal Pradesh, Ladakh, Kashmir, and then all the way back, right? It was a 45-day road trip, and there were 18 stops in it, and many of those 18 stops were in rural areas. And I was in this small town called Deogarh in Rajasthan, and I saw a camel farmer over there, and I went to talk to him because I noticed he had a smartphone, while I was passing by. So I went to talk to him. What are you using it for? So he said, I'm using it. I was actually using one of our company's apps to trade animals on it, right? So he was saying, "Pehle." So I said, "How come you using it?" He said, "Pehle dalal aata tha, dalal 40% leke jata tha, and now I can do it through these kind of apps." And one of them was our app where I can trade cattle through it. And I can tell you that this particular company of ours is now doing 100 crores of cattle trading a month on its app within about 5 months of launching of that product. So the internet has gone very deep. Apps are being built for all parts of India. Building for Bharat has been the mantra for the last few years, and that is only going to grow. There's a lot happening in agri-tech. There's a lot happening in rural. There's a lot happening in you said you're in multilingual, and the reason you're probably multilingual is because you have a lot of viewers in all those languages, right?
Right.
So that is what is happening, yeah. It's everywhere now.
Right.
It's no
So,
longer
Saurabh,
confined to any pockets,
Right. So, Saurabh, let's just switch gears to the whole funding issue. And we've got a battery of startups lining up for an IPO this year. So there's Nykaa, and there's Delivery, and there's Zomato, and there's Policy Bazaar. They're all trying to take the IPO route. So, at some level, is it okay for Indian startups right now to open their books to public scrutiny, especially when profitability is something that is still not completely clear with startups?
Kartik, loads of companies that list on NASDAQ are not profitable. Okay. So, I think the time when you should think of listing on any exchange is when you think that you can actually give the right guidance to people who want to hear you. So when you're ready with the right governance framework, then you can run a company in the way that public entities would like. Because very often startups will run in a very different ad hoc manner. If there's a VC investor, there's just one investor, they can talk to that investor. But when you have public money, you need to be doing a lot more by way of compliance, by way of reporting. When you're ready for that, it's okay to list, provided that your valuation is such that the public issue is of a certain amount. So I think it's a good idea for startups to list, but certainly they need to have a certain amount of scale before they list. Otherwise, they'll go on to the small SME exchanges. But if they want to list on the main exchange, personally, I would like to see more of it happen. Right. There'll be a learning. So instead of everybody having to go to NASDAQ, some can list here. And we do have many companies today. I know SaaS companies 3-4 years ago were crying because, they had nowhere to list and they wanted to list. So personally, I think it's a very good idea. It also indicates a sort of intention of the founders that they're not looking for a quick exit. They're building a company to last.
Right.
So I would encourage people to do it.
Yeah, just a follow-up question on that. So Indian regulations still require you to be profitable, right? And there's a certain profit after tax that you need to report.
No.
Okay.
No, that's not required.
So what makes better sense for them? Should they look at Indian IPOs, Indian exchanges to list on, or is listing abroad a better idea?
No, Indian exchanges do not require you now. SEBI does not require you to be profitable before listing. But you should list where you think you're going to get the best value. So if you think you can list on NASDAQ and get much better value, you should list on NASDAQ. But for many companies, maybe the market cap is not enough or to list on NASDAQ. And if their entire business is in India, right, then it's possible they may get better valuation here. So if you look at all the IT service companies, they all wanted to list overseas. They only had overseas businesses. Today, you have a lot of unicorns that do no business overseas, that actually are only on the Indian market. So the brand recognition is here. So if you want to list abroad, recognize there's a very high overhead to it. I don't just mean fees and all the rest. The CEO's virtually full-time job is to basically go and create branding for that company. Otherwise, it won't be traded. So it's not simple to list on NASDAQ and be valuable. So
Right.
I think each company should make its own call. Where does it make more sense to list?
And just to stick on with the IPO issue, Saurabh, if you can also tell us, listing on an IPO or listing on an exchange, coming out with an IPO, what would that mean for employees who have ESOPs?
I think it would be brilliant, because actually today when you give people ESOPs or whatever, they're only of value when there's an exit.
Right.
If you do an IPO, there's automatic value for what they hold. And then you can continue to give them different mechanisms of incentives. You know, you have SDRs, I mean, you have stock appreciation rights. There are many things you can give people. There are more ways to incentivize them. So I think it's perfectly good. There's no issue with that.
Right. Rehan, just coming to you now, your report also suggests that 1 in every 4 unicorns, in fact, it's a known fact now, out of the 44, 11 startups, 11 unicorns are from the fintech space. Does it at some level suggest that Indians are taking their money a little more seriously than they used to?
Well, it also means that Indians were very underbanked, right? They didn't have, the banking system has not spread very deep, whether it's in lending, wealth management, payments, and, B2B, B2C, and all these areas. Now the fintech unicorns have come in, they've started filling up that gap. We personally believe that is yet a very large ocean, and a lot more, a lot more companies need to come into that to fill them up. But that is the reason, right? The reason there's a lot of fintech, unicorns is because there's a large gap in that space.
So,
I mean, look,
Saurabh,
look
I'll
at
come
credit
to you
cards, right?
now, Rehan.
They've only 25. There are only 25 million credit cards in India, for example, right?
Right.
Everybody else in India didn't have an electronic payment system. So when you got the payment startups, it was amazing.
Right. So, in fact, Saurabh, there's another report by NASSCOM which suggests that there are 12 more unicorns expected this year. So, should we expect the same ratio, 25% of that, let's say about 3 startups coming from the fintech space?
I don't know about the fintech space, where they'll come from, but certainly the report, NASSCOM has done a report, TAI has done a report. And fundamentally, if you look at it, we already have 38 unicorns, which is third largest in the world. We added 12 in the previous year, and that was the second highest any country added. It was just after the US. And there are actually almost 55 in the pipeline. So it's always easier to make a call a little further down the road. So I would say by 2025, we should have 100 unicorn. And yes, a lot of them will be from the fintech space. But don't be surprised if some of them actually are in the healthcare space. That's a space that has huge activity today. EdTech. And I just wanted to add to what Rehan said earlier. There's a huge number of startups today
Right.
that are building their businesses around solving on scale massive Indian challenges. In healthcare, we've seen a 5x growth, for example, in telemedicine and teleconsultations than we did before. And there is a reason to expect this, Kartik, because the government has done its piece by creating platforms, UID, UPI, many of those.
Absolutely.
And then what's happened is we've got a 750 million internet users. And smartphones under $70, 4G, 5G, call rates that have dropped by 90% in the last 4 or 5 years, we are now the number 2 in the world on download of apps. So if you look at all of it, and COVID, although I would never wish it happened again, has so accelerated a push to the digital economy that actually for us, it's a phenomenal launchpad, given that we already have a $200 billion IT industry. So we have the tech, we have the people. Now we have the market. Companies are becoming unicorns on the domestic market. So personally, if I would say there's no question we'll have 100 unicorns by 2025. But I'm very bullish on where our startup ecosystem would actually go. And hopefully the government will do a few more enabling measures as we go along. One of the things we do need is more domestic capital. Unlike most countries, 80% of our risk capital comes from overseas. We need to increase that piece. So we do need a few more things, but we seem to be doing very well even today. So I'm very bullish.
Right. So, Rehan, your report also suggests that 86%, that's almost 9 out of every 10 unicorns today, are actually headed by an engineer or an engineering degree, at least between one of the co-founders. So, I mean, in today's day and age, would it be foolhardy for a non-technology idea to really aim to become a startup one day?
Well, our report, first of all, is the tech unicorn report. There are unicorns which are non-tech, which are not covered by our report.
Okay.
And that is why you're seeing the skew of engineering within that report, right? There are unicorns in, there are unicorns in real estate, there are unicorns in shipping, there are all kinds of unicorns out there. But we don't cover those. Ours is a tech unicorn report, and that's why you're seeing that skew.
Saurabh, let me end with you. Initiatives like Startup India, how valuable are they to actually propel this entire culture of starting up in India?
I think they're very valuable. See, there are two things. I think it's only in the last 5 years that any government in India has talked about startups in a budget speech. I'm not talking about this budget speech. It happened 4 or 5 years ago. Startups are being recognized, celebrated. You are partly responsible. When we were building the IT services industry, there was no celebration of entrepreneurs. There's no media coverage. It was not aspirational. Today, it's aspirational to be a startup. In our time in the 90s, when all Murthy, myself, we were starting companies, friends, relatives, everybody said, look, don't be stupid. You have a good job, stay with it. So, to my mind, the whole thing about Startup India, the message, apart from the activities that it does, which help, the point is that it puts a lens that this is the good thing to do. This is what the country wants. You are, recognized, you're appreciated, you're almost revered, which is what used to happen to us in the software industry after a while. So the best and the brightest people that we have, are beginning to come out and actually be entrepreneurs. And when this happens, great companies will actually result. So I think, yes, it's played a very important role.
That's a wrap on this show. Saurabh Srivastava, thank you so much for joining us. Rehan Yar Khan, many thanks for being here with us. That's a wrap on this show. 100 more unicorns by 2025. Let's hope that happens soon. That's a wrap. Thank you. Bye-bye.